the background, actually my background goes back probably, at least as it relates to SludgeHammer, it goes back to when I was 10 years old and made my first bottle of wine. Because I started making wine literally when I was 10, and that is the quintessential microbiological industry. It's probably the oldest industry, you know, in the world, but it's also the oldest microbiologically based industry. But I was always interested in water. I lived on a lake, so I was always, you know, on the water. And gradually, I eventually got my bachelor's degree at the University of Miami in Florida because I became interested in oceanography when I was in the Navy and actually had a chance to cruise the world. I then went back to Wayne State University in Detroit and got a master's degree in limnology, which is the study of freshwater biology. But then in '72, I volunteered to go out to Bodega Bay, California. And while I was there, it was a lobster project where they were actually domesticating the American lobster. So I went out there, and while I was there, the director of the project asked me if I could become the project manager. So I stayed at the Marine Laboratory. And that was my introduction to wastewater treatment, because we had thousands of tiny lobsters literally living in their toilet. I mean, if you look at the development of technology as it relates to wastewater treatment, the marine aquarium industry is the most advanced because they have absolutely zero tolerance for error. And their animals simply die if they don't keep their wastewater systems working. And George Chabanaglis, who is one of the preeminent wastewater specialists in the world, who, you know, he wrote the Metcalf and Eddy textbook and everything about that. George Chabanaglis was the top person in it. He was the co-principal investigator for the Lobster Project. So I was working with George, and we were doing, you know, this wastewater treatment component as part of the, you know, the lobster farming thing. While I was at the Marine Laboratory, we started hiring a bunch of PhDs for postdoctoral fellows, and I didn't have a PhD at the time, so I said, it's not going to work. I can't be the boss of a bunch of PhDs. So I enrolled at Berkeley, stayed at the Bodega Marine Laboratory, changed my research effort to the Big Dungeness crab fishery, and worked on parasitology and various aspects of population biology and fisheries management and all those things. And did that for almost 20 years. Got my PhD in 1979 from Berkeley. And then, right at the time I got my PhD, I was still working at the lab. I then started a commercial winery called Sea Ridge Winery on the Sonoma coast. And so I got back into that industrial scale microbiology very strongly at that point. And had the winery for about 15 years, and eventually got involved with a group that was using a bacterial solution to clean up contaminated soils with petroleum products. And started working in that, and eventually became fascinated by it and gave up the winery, sold the winery business, got out of the university, and just devoted my energies into this whole concept of bioremediation. And we were using bacteria that are derived from the forest leaf litter zone. And we developed a composting process for contaminated soils, which were very heavily contaminated. And we did work down in Mexico with Pemex. We worked with the Marine Corps down at Camp Pendleton, the Naval Station in Oakland, and cleaned these contaminated soils using these bacteria. And at the time, we were blending in cattle manure as an amendment to the process. So we were composting it. We were stacking up, you know, you'd stack a pile of contaminated soil, you'd mix in cattle manure, and you'd spray the bacterial blend within there. And it would become very aggressive, and the bacteria would eat all the material. They would eat the cattle manure because it's good food, and as a side product, they would be eating the petroleum component. And as part of that, I was interacting with dairymen, and they had these manure lagoons, which were a mess. You know, they had very, very high strength waste coming into a manure lagoon. They would irrigate it over a pasture, and it would clog the pasture, totally impact the soil. And we dealt with this one dairyman in Petaluma, California, who was releasing ammonia to the nearby stream from his operation, and Fish and Game caught him and told him that he had to do something. So we started treating that dairy with the bacterial blend, the same blend that we were using. And what we saw was really striking, because he would scoop the manure out of the dairy barn into the upper pond, which was just for solids. He then would try to run that through a screen and get the solids out, and then the liquid would pass down to the lower pond, which he would use to irrigate his field. When he would do that, the screen would bind up almost immediately, because manure is just very slimy. It's got a lot of mucus material in it. That mucus material really is one of the biggest problems in wastewater treatment, because it's very viscous. It makes wastewater a very viscous product. Things don't settle out. Odors would develop. You'd get anaerobic pockets. It's really one of the main problems. What we found was the very first thing these bacteria would attack is they'd get into that. And even these are aerobic bacteria, but in an anaerobic environment, they focus in on the sugar in the mucus because it's a sugar compound, and they ferment it. And immediately we saw suddenly that the liquid becomes non-viscous. He would work his screen, and he was getting extremely clean fiber off the screen. And he was then able to recover manure fiber that we had cleaned and use it to bed his cattle with. And, we were stunned when we were watching all this stuff, because we had no idea what to expect. Then we saw the effect of the bacteria move down to the lower pond, and as soon as he started irrigating his fields with that, the first thing that happened was the odor disappeared. He would get phone calls from his neighbors the minute he would turn on his sprinklers all the time. But when he started treating with the bacteria, they never called, because they never could smell him. They didn't know when he was irrigating anymore, because there was no obvious sign to it. Then the other thing it did is it worked that soil, and it ate the compacted manure and opened the soil again, so water could percolate down. And instead of having rainfall hit the soil and run off directly into the stream, it would enter the soil and would be treated. So he converted literally this entire several acres that he was irrigating into his final treatment system. It became the giant earth filtration unit that he had. And the only reason it didn't work before is because he was putting the wrong kind of material onto it. And that's when the breakthrough occurred, and I realized that these bacteria, if you looked at any kind of soil-based disposal system, like a septic tank or something, which is the same deal, it's just mucus from these tanks goes out and clogs the soil, that then was the thing that was the thing we had to solve and figure out how to do. When you have to deal with a septic system that's clogged, it's almost always going to be this mucus material that clogs it. And I looked at that, recognizing I had a bacterial assemblage that could eliminate that. The question then was, how do you get aerobic bacteria to thrive and survive in a septic tank? And that's what led to the development of the SludgeHammer. The bacteria are interesting. There's a way to think about the use of bacteria in municipal or any kind of waste treatment circumstance. Number one is the wastewater industry is the only industry on earth that's microbiologically based that does not routinely use selected microbes that are specific to that purpose. Winemaking, brewing, pharmaceutical, enzyme production, any microbiologically based industry always picks their bacteria, cultures them, grows them, and uses them. And the wastewater industry doesn't, and it never has. It's like a great analogy here in Seattle is think of the computer industry. The computer industry, when I went to college, University of Miami, the computer was a 3-story building. There was nothing but a giant mechanical adder. It was just a big mechanical calculator that would do all kinds of calculations. It wasn't until people right here in Seattle said, let's start working on the software. The computers were nothing but hardware. And it wasn't until software came in and people started to think about the software that suddenly the synergy between software development and hardware development took off. And now my little iPhone in my pocket has the same computing power as the old supercomputers that the military used back when I was in college, or in fact I was an adult, so it didn't take very long. Wastewater, that's what I see wastewater. it's been dominated by hardware for its entire existence. Engineers are the ones who develop the hardware. Ponds, tanks, sewer pipelines, it's all hardware. And the software was just left to chance. My vision of the SludgeHammer is effectively, think of it like your laptop computer, compared to a mainframe, which is a sewer plant that handles the city. That's a mainframe, it's all hardware. We took the software and brought it in, and suddenly we could condense it down, you can put it in your backyard, and you've got a full-scale treatment plant. It's just like a PC.